Hello, my name is Adam Regier. I am a master's student in the Department of Geography here at the University of Victoria, where I work in the Social Energy Lab under the supervision of Dr. Christina Hoyka. Our lab works to understand different aspects of the clean energy transition, including the emergence of clusters of low-carbon innovation and renewable energy innovations, as well as energy citizenship. I'm very excited to share some details into the research being conducted by members of this lab. This research began in the fall of 2022 as a part of an undergraduate honors thesis and moved into being a more collaborative project in the summer of 2023 and was actually submitted to a journal this fall. Our lab works within the realms of energy geography, which is a subfield of geography that studies the spatial aspects of energy production, distribution, and consumption. It's especially concerned with the environmental, social, and economic impacts of various energy resources, technologies, and systems. So today I'm going to provide some insight into some research we did on how cities source renewable energy, looking at the mechanisms that they utilize to do so, as well as the actors involved in the process. We'll start by looking at the broader context for this research within the field of energy geography, and then we'll get into some more specific details of the project and the implications of the finding. As the impacts of climate change become increasingly evident, entities around the world, ranging from federal governments to companies to city councils, are increasingly prioritizing climate action. An essential aspect of climate action is decarbonization, or the process of decreasing or eliminating the emissions associated with human activities. At the core of decarbonization is the process of electrification, which seeks to replace other sources of energy, including fossil fuels, with electricity in an effort to reduce emissions. Electrification is already being undertaken by various sectors of the economy that are seeking to transition away from fossil fuels as a part of their effort to make their activities more climate friendly, as well as a way to combat or avoid the rising costs of fossil fuels. In combination with this process of electrification, energy demand is being driven by rising demand for electric-powered appliances like heat pumps and fans. All of those processes together mean that energy demand or total electricity demand could increase by up to 160% by the year 2050, according to the International Energy Agency. Now, if we're going to seek to decarbonize our economy through electrification, that can only be achieved if the electricity is being sourced from non-emitting sources of electricity. A lot of the current focus around decarbonization efforts in countries like Canada are dependent on having a decarbonized electricity grid that you can transition to in order to replace fossil fuels. Climate solutions like electric cars, heat pumps, or hydrogen are entirely dependent on having the critical decarbonized electricity sector in order to be successful. However, currently electricity accounts for about 8.4% of emissions in Canada, or about 61 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And just for some comparison, in the United States, electricity composes about 25% of their overall emissions, or about 1.5 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalency. Now, in this graph on the screen, you can see the green slot that represents the amount of emissions that electricity is responsible for. But if you begin to look at other parts of this chart, such as the sections for buildings and transportation and heavy industry, those are the industries or the economic sectors that are especially able to benefit from the process of electrification. So an entirely decarbonized electricity grid would be able to remove the sections from this chart for heavy industry, electricity, buildings, and transport. And so that really begins to demonstrate the potential that renewable energy and a decarbonized electricity grid has for reducing emissions associated with our economy. However, there are some factors that need to be considered when we're thinking about renewable electricity and renewable energy. The decarbonization of our electricity sector mainly needs to happen through the introduction of those types of non-emitting sources of electricity, mainly renewables like wind and solar. At the same time, you have to be replacing the already emitting sources of electricity like coal or gas power plants. An important factor when it comes to thinking about renewable electricity and rolling out those types of technologies is the concept of energy density or power density. And that has to do with how much geographic space is actually required to produce any given amount of energy, generally measured in watts per square meter. And an issue that needs to be overcome when it comes to renewable sources of electricity is that the energy density of those technologies is relatively low compared to other sources. Electricity plants that use fossil fuels or biomass as a fuel source have an energy density between 300 and 3,000 watts per square meter. Nuclear plants have an energy density of about 500 watts per square meters, but renewables, excluding things like large-scale hydro facilities, only have an energy density of between 5 and 50 watts per square meter. So we can see that the energy density of renewable electricity sources ranges from about 6 to 600 times lower than other sources. And so this means that renewable energy development is influenced by a need for much more geographic space than is required within fossil fuels. We're also here now going to look at a few other factors that are influencing the rollout of renewable energy, including decentralization, urbanization, and energy justice, before we really start to get into our specific research. So the first concept we'll look at is decentralization. Historically, the electricity sector has really been comprised of these large-scale electricity infrastructures, coal and gas power plants that are far removed from most consumers, but connected to them by these kind of large-scale transmission lines. The ownership and operation of these types of facilities are overwhelmingly large public or private utility companies, state-backed energy companies, that types of things. These are known as incumbent actors, and they really dominate what has been known as the centralized system. However, there are a number of factors that have really begun to drive the decentralization of energy, or a turn away from those really centrally operated systems. One of those is climate change. People are becoming increasingly concerned with their own impact on the environment, and so they're more interested in how the electricity and energy they consume is produced. The liberalization of energy policy, such as the rollback of regulations or the opening up of the energy market to new types of actors, is also allowing new people to get involved, new entities to get involved in the energy sector. Increased demand for resilience is something that people are looking for. People want their electricity grids to be able to survive through shocks like storms, and sometimes that can be difficult to achieve with these centrally operated systems that are run by entities that might be geographically far away from where the grids are actually built. Another is technological developments that are facilitating the development of energy infrastructure, as well as the falling cost of renewable energy technology, which is kind of opening up involvement in the energy sector to groups that previously lacked the types of resources necessary to get involved. So all of those factors together are kind of creating a trend of decentralization that's creating opportunities for these new niche actors. And those niche actors are those that are kind of being provided the opportunity to get into energy due to those trends influencing decentralization that we just discussed. A significant number of these niche actors fall into the civic actor type category. So these are residents, citizens, households, community organizations, but they also could be public actors. It could be a local municipal government beginning to get involved in energy development, or even private actors, so a new, smaller, independent power producer that's getting involved. With policy supports in place, there are kind of a number of different types of ways that people or entities can begin to get involved in energy. Households or hospitals or schools could purchase and install solar systems that would allow them to produce, store, and even sell electricity to decrease their own electricity costs, their energy costs, while also beginning to adjust their emissions. Another opportunity could be individuals being able to invest in new local, regional, or national energy cooperatives. While there are a lot of different opportunities and different examples, we can generally see that as a result of the decentralization of energy systems, we're beginning to observe civic actors like citizens and households and community organizations become participants in the renewable energy transition, and they're becoming participants alongside those traditional incumbent actors like public utilities or privately owned energy companies. Another trend that's really influencing renewable energy development is urbanization. And urbanization refers to the increasing proportional concentration of people in cities relative to previous times. And so while 200 or 300 years ago, maybe 2 or 3 out of every 10 people lived in cities, the United Nations predicts that by the year 2050, up to 7 in 10 people worldwide could be living in cities. Cities already consume the majority of generated electricity. We know that densely populated urban areas require much more electricity and energy than more sparsely populated rural or kind of suburban regions. Cities only account for about 2% of the world's surface, but they're comprised already over half of the world's population and over 2/3 of the global energy usage. This kind of disparity of a concentration of energy demand in urban areas is only going to increase as trends of urbanization continue, which is something that has been documented, and it's also going to be influenced by that trend of electrification we talked about. So not only are there going to be more people living in cities, but they're going to be traveling on electric vehicles. Their houses are going to be powered by electric heat pumps rather than gas. And the industries in cities might use electricity instead of coal as a source of energy. And so if we remember that renewable energy has lower energy density, it takes more space to produce the same amount of electricity from renewable sources, the tension between urbanization and the renewable energy transition kind of becomes increasingly evident. We can see that it's just not feasible to simply remove fossil fuel electricity plants and build renewable energy sources in their place. Cities lack the geographic space required to produce the necessary amount of renewable electricity they need within their borders. However, the rural areas surrounding cities that have a lower population density and lower land costs do have the land available to produce the scale of renewable electricity that cities really need. As a result, researchers have begun to document that cities are entering into relationships with other actors in their region as a part of their mission to sustainably source electricity. The last concept we'll take a look at is energy justice. And the concept of energy justice seeks to apply the tenets and values of environmental justice, of the environmental justice movement, to energy. Energy justice can kind of be used as a framework to better understand how to prevent the renewable energy transition from reinforcing an unjust system that developed during the era of fossil fuels. Now, a central aspect of energy justice is distributional justice, and this specifically seeks to understand how the benefits and impacts of energy development, all aspects of the energy system, from extraction to transportation to consumption, how the impacts and benefits of that system are distributed both geographically but also across society. Energy justice provides the framework to understand that energy infrastructure has a long-standing legacy of inequality, involving highly localized impacts with more diffused benefits when it comes to the fossil fuel system. Research has shown that pollution from coal burned to generate electricity results in significant numbers of premature deaths, asthma, diabetes, stroke, chronic respiratory diseases, and this occurs in areas where coal is being burned. And so that is kind of an example of that kind of unjust and uneven distribution of the benefits and impacts of energy. And within a system with coal, if you think about it, the whole city is able to benefit from the burning of that coal because the whole city is able to use that electricity, but only the community around where the coal is burned are feeling kind of the full force of the negative impacts of that system. Research also suggests that marginalized and racialized communities are the most likely to be negatively impacted by energy development. And now, while the environmental and health impacts of renewable energy are different than fossil fuels, they're not entirely gone. Noise disruption, increased traffic, and land use change all qualify as negative externalities of renewable energy. So simply moving away from fossil fuels is not going to eliminate the negative impacts of energy development. Unfortunately, the uneven distribution of the effects of renewable energy is already beginning to materialize. A wide range of studies have shown that there are adverse effects of negative large-scale renewable energy development, and these have already begun to impact communities in a lot of different contexts, ranging from the United Kingdom to Mexico, India, Kenya, and Brazil. In extreme cases, marginalized communities have experienced forced land grabs, suffered negative health issues, and faced socioeconomic adversity as a result of renewable energy development. For example, a 2010 study found that wind farms in England were disproportionately located in regions with lower socioeconomic profiles. In Brazil, wind development was shown to prevent subsistence fishers from fishing and shellfish gathering in areas around their communities. And since 2012, more than 200 human rights violations related to renewable energy development have been reported. And so the renewable energy transition is kind of a unique opportunity to begin to address the historic inequity related to energy development and energy systems. We know that $22 trillion is going to be spent on the development of renewable energy systems by 2050, and this money does unfortunately have the potential to exacerbate existing social and economic inequality. We've seen this happen before, like during the COVID-19 pandemic, where governments spent billions of dollars and economic and wealth inequality were exacerbated rather than rectified. Luckily, work has already begun on how to prevent this from happening as a part of the renewable energy transition. In fact, the entire field of a just transition and researching a just transition purposefully involves thinking about how the costs and benefits of climate action are going to be distributed. And it thinks about how the long-term effects of the policy decisions we make right now might evolve. We know that there are documented benefits of climate policy, including renewable energy development. These benefits include income, jobs, skill development, community empowerment, the development of more environmentally friendly lifestyles, and access to more affordable energy. However, literature around energy justice and a just transition has shown that the distribution of the impacts of renewable energy policy is closely related to the types of people who are involved in all stages of project development. This can be through involvement in everything from the planning process to the sourcing of material and laborers to the actual ownership of the project themselves. The literature has generally come to an agreement that projects that are planned by locals, have local ownership, and local and material labor sourcing are more likely to result in the manifestation of benefits for the community where the project is siting than projects that don't. Energy projects that are led by local citizens are sometimes referred to as communities of place and are often focused around achieving various localized objectives that could be environmental, social, or economic in nature. These locally led initiatives that include civic actors are considered ideal as they're more likely to be rooted in the social values of the local community and generate those benefits for the local community as well. Projects can be led by people located outside of the community where the project is sited. The upside of these projects is that it can provide increased access to the types of skills and resources necessary to have a viable and successful project. But there is concern that these types of projects that are led by people outside the community that the project is sited in run the risk of kind of being perceived as imposed on the local community, as being institutional in nature, and in having the benefits of that development leave the community rather than remain inside of it. So to summarize, in order to decarbonize their economies, growing cities are going to need more renewable energy than they have the space to produce. This is resulting in new relationships emerging between cities and the regions in the areas around them and the entities within those regions. In order to ensure that these new patterns of development do not recreate historic inequality, local actors in the community where renewable energy is being developed must be involved. Currently, there's limited literature on the actors and mechanisms involved in regional renewable electricity sourcing. And so our research looked to begin to overcome those problems and that lack of research because understanding the mechanisms being used by cities developing these regional relationships can allow for more informed decision-making by other cities looking to achieve their climate goals in the future. So the first goal of this research was to document the potential options available to the range of actors working to decarbonize their city's energy sources from regional sources of renewable energy. The second goal of the research was to document the presence of actors involved in different mechanisms that cities may use to decarbonize their electricity sector. This will allow for a better understanding of how the impacts and benefits of these new relationships are going to be distributed. So as I mentioned, this research began as an undergraduate thesis supervised by Dr. Christina Hoyka at the Social Energy Lab here at the University of Victoria, and later was added to by Dr. Anna Burka at Massey University in New Zealand. So we'll get into a little bit on how the research was actually conducted. The sample frame for this research was actually developed for a different paper that explored the potential roles being played by different actors in regional renewable energy development. And so there were kind of parameters set up for that data set that apply to this one as well. So cities had to have a minimum population of 100,000 people. They had to have a high energy density. They had to have a population density of at least 200 people per square kilometer. And they had to have ambitious climate plans that involved the city becoming either carbon neutral or reaching 100% renewable energy citywide. Limiting the data set to cities with these types of goals was important because these are the cities that represent the highest level of ambition when it comes to decarbonization. The goals of carbon neutrality or reaching 100% renewable energy reflect the type of large-scale systemic change that's actually required to achieve a decarbonized economy. So this is a little bit more of a breakdown as to how the research actually occurred. So we began by looking at that pre-existing data set and identifying cities that had some form of regional involvement in their energy plans. And this resulted in the identification of 27 different cities. Then, for each city, relevant documents were studied for any mentions of sourcing renewable electricity on a regional scale, which was then summarized and recorded. The types of documents we looked at included energy and climate planning documents, city and other organizational websites, as well as regional development plans and a whole slew of other types of documents. Ultimately, over 100 different documents were studied as a part of this research. So mentions of regional sourcing of renewable electricity were then collected together, and excerpts that discussed kind of similar strategies were grouped together and categorized under a single definition that encompassed all of the definitions within that group. Then those groups were named to create what we refer to as regional renewable energy procurement mechanisms. We also looked at those mentions of sourcing renewable electricity on a regional scale for specific mentions as to the types of actors involved in those processes. We were specifically kind of looking for civic involvement because that reflects the type of local involvement necessary to reflect in the local manifestation of benefits. So this is a map of the cities in the data set. We can see that they're overwhelmingly countries in the global north and high-income countries, so just keep that in mind as we discuss the findings here. So, this research found 8 broad types of mechanisms of regional renewable energy procurement mechanisms with 56 specific examples across 25 different cities. So unfortunately, in 2 of the cities identified in our sample, we did not find any actual evidence of the regional procurement of renewable energy. This research shows that cities are implementing a variety of different mechanisms to source renewable energy, renewable electricity at a regional scale, with a lot of cities actually utilizing multiple mechanisms simultaneously. And the mechanisms are on the screen there ranked by popularity as to how many cities actually used each one. So the most common power purchase agreements were present in 12 of the 27 examined cities, and the least common centralized decision makings was found in 2 of the 27 examined cities. And so next we'll look into the specific mechanisms themselves. I'll give a definition, and then we will look at a specific example as to what that mechanism can look like. So the first and most common was a power purchasing agreement. And so this is where cities enter into agreements with other entities to purchase renewable energy from regional sources. And as you can see, 12 cities used this mechanism. And so the example for this one is in Bonn, in Germany, where the publicly owned utility in the city has entered into a power purchasing agreement with a civic energy co-op located in a smaller town in the wider region. This energy cooperative is a collective of 319 citizens that jointly own a wind farm capable of producing enough electricity to power 2,000 homes. And so the city of Bonn has agreed to purchase the renewable electricity from that development. The next mechanism we'll look at is city-led project development. And this is where cities fund the construction and operation of existing or new regional renewable energy projects. And the example here is in Copenhagen, where the municipally owned utility, once again, has begun to actually build their own wind turbine farms. They are looking to build a capacity of about 114 megawatts at different farms both in and in the broader region around Copenhagen. And this includes an 11 turbine wind farm with the ability to power 24,000 homes located at a village on an island, actually off the coast of Copenhagen there. This specific project is also kind of unique because it allows residents to purchase shares in the development of that wind farm. And that mechanism, city-led project development, was used by 10 cities. The next one is advocacy. And so this is where cities pressure outside entities to increase access to regional renewable energy sources. And this one is common in jurisdictions where cities lack the ability to engage in the energy system, or where there are a lot of barriers to doing so. This one was found numerous times in Japan. Japan has an electricity market that is comprised entirely of 8 regional monopolies, and the cities lack any real control over those monopolies. And so the cities are actually pressuring the federal government to pass legislation that would mandate that these monopolies begin to transition to renewable energy sources. The last one for this slide is incumbent city collaboration project development. And this is where cities participate in a collaboration with incumbent actors that seek to support the development of renewable energy on a regional scale. And it's really that incumbent term that's critical to understanding this mechanism. If we think back, incumbent actors are those that were kind of already involved in energy development. Those are those large privately owned energy companies or those state-backed utilities. And the example here is in Heidelberg, where the city has purchased a 7% stake in a nationwide company that seeks to build 350 megawatts of renewable capacity by the year 2030. And that company is kind of a joint venture with some other municipal utilities as well as a number of private companies. So next we'll look at niche city collaboration project development. And this one is quite similar to the previous one we discussed, but it sees cities actively participate in a collaboration that involves niche actors in the development of regional renewable energy projects. And so those niche actors are the newcomers to the energy sector, whose participation is kind of being facilitated by those trends of decentralization. And the example here is in Islington, which is a municipality in the Greater London metropolitan area. And Islington is participating in a program being run by the Office of the Mayor of London that seeks to facilitate the installation of solar panels on both homes and businesses across the Greater London area. And so by allowing people to install and sell electricity back to the grid, this project seeks to increase the overall mix of renewable energy in the region around London and obviously in the region around Islington as well. Getting into the mechanisms that are a little bit less common, market stimulation sees cities campaign to raise awareness of renewable energy options in order to encourage consumers to transition themselves. And the theory here is that this will signal demand to the market for regional renewable energy. And the example here is from Houston, Texas, where the market is quite liberalized. And the city is claiming that the best way to increase the share of carbon-free energy in the region is to encourage civic and private actors or consumers to only purchase renewably sourced electricity. So the city works with retail electricity providers to educate and encourage consumers about the availability of green retail electricity projects or products. And these are often green electricity packages that would see you pay a little bit more to only get electricity from renewable sources. And theoretically, this will signal demand to the market for more renewable energy, which will in turn motivate the development of more renewable energy projects. The next mechanism we'll look at is project acquisition. And this is where cities purchase already operating regional renewable energy projects. The example here is also in Copenhagen, where the city utility purchased an already operating wind turbine project on a different island off the coast of Copenhagen, actually, that was originally built by a private developer. The last and least common mechanism is centralized decision-making. And this involves cities that aren't necessarily directly involved in the sourcing of energy, that leave the decision-making around regional renewable electricity to an entity that the city really lacks any control over. And the example here is in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the United States, where the electricity in St. Paul is entirely managed by a private actor called Xcel Energy. And that company has, of its own volition, committed to delivering 100% carbon-free electricity by the year 2050. And so with that kind of claim in place, the city has decided that no action is required other than just continuing to deal with Xcel Energy as an energy provider. Now, the second part of our results have to do with actor involvement. And so this chart provides a breakdown of all the different actors involved in the 56 iterations of regional renewable energy procurement mechanisms identified. And so on the outside, that's the total number of actors involved in each mechanism type. So as an example, in all of the power purchasing agreements that we identified as a part of this research, there were 20 actors involved. And then the inner ring with the breakdowns of different blues show how different types of actors were involved in those processes. So the darkest blue is public actors, so your government-backed, your state-backed actors. The medium blue is your private entities, and the lightest blue is civic actors. And so we can see that public and private actors really dominate the landscape of regional renewable energy sourcing. Public actors were present in 55 of the 56 mechanisms we looked at. Private actors were involved in 45% of the mechanisms, or 25 out of the 56 mechanisms, and civic actors were only involved in 21%, or 12 out of the 56 mechanisms. So, what do these findings actually mean? Well, the findings of this research really confirms the importance of regionalism in the sourcing of renewable electricity. The mechanisms that we identified in this paper showed that the cities in the data set are working to overcome issues of renewable energy density by sourcing renewable electricity on a regional scale. This research also looked specifically at who is involved in those processes. As we mentioned on the previous slide, public and private actors really dominate regional renewable energy procurement mechanisms, and the lack of civic involvement in the processes is concerning. Given that the literature suggests that involvement in some forms of climate action, like renewable energy development, is necessary to ensure a fair distribution of the development's outcomes, while also actually boosting support for those projects. The types of local entities that would need to be involved in renewable energy development in order to result in an equitable distribution of the benefits and impacts, including households, individuals, or community organizations, generally fall into the same category of civic actors, which is why the lack of civic actors, as I mentioned, is especially concerning. If some types of actors aren't being included in renewable energy development, then those excluded actors aren't going to benefit from the renewable energy transition in the same way as the actors that were involved. The current trends of involvement in regional renewable energy procurement, as identified by this research, suggests that the benefits of these developments are not necessarily going to be distributed in a way that benefits civic actors. If decision makers and leaders want to ensure that there are local benefits for any given renewable energy project, they need to ensure that local civic actors are being engaged in the development in a substantial and tangible way. Now, while the findings of this research might be a little bit disheartening, there are some exciting examples that demonstrate the potential for niche actors to step into the electricity sector. Specifically identified in this research is that example of the Civil Energy Co-op in Bonn, where that community-owned wind turbine is engaging with the city in order to sell renewable electricity, and that's a really great example. One that wasn't specifically identified as a part of this research, but actually is being examined in the Social Energy Lab here at UVic, is a little bit more local in Vancouver, where Vancouver has actually put out kind of very specific goals about how much renewable energy they need. And they have said that if the local energy monopoly, BC Hydro, is unable to provide that energy, they'll look elsewhere. And that is actually opening up some really exciting opportunities for independent power producers in British Columbia, and especially First Nations communities, where First Nations communities would be able to have community renewable energy project that would result not only in ecological benefits, but also serve as a source of economic development for those communities as well. And it would serve as a form of development that is a little more reflective of their own values and goals than other forms of economic development. Now, there are a number of considerations in this research. The first is generally around language. The researchers are predominantly English-speaking, and as you may have noticed on that map, a significant number of the examined cities were in non-English-speaking countries, and so that resulted in having to translate a lot of documents, and those translations could have resulted in misinterpreted or maybe missed results. We also relied on internet searches to kind of identify documents or projects, and the reliance on those internet searches being conducted in English could also have missed resources that would have provided some more insight into regional renewable energy procurement mechanisms. Another limitation could be the parameters that we included around climate plans. So remember that cities had to have ambitious climate plans, which means that cities that didn't necessarily have much or such ambitious plans, but still had regional renewable energy, would have been missed as a part of this research. We also saw that the cities present in this data set are entirely located in what can generally be considered high-income countries in the global north. In countries where cities have fewer resources, their ability to kind of approve ambitious climate plans may be different, and their ways of interacting with regions to source renewable electricity could also be very different if they have different resources available to them than the cities in our data set. Despite these limitations, though, the findings of this research are really able to confirm the observation that cities are looking beyond their geographical and legal borders in order to source the renewable energy they need. So this research should really be understood as step 0 in working towards a better future. It's a preliminary exploration of regional renewable energy procurement mechanisms, and it's not really meant to be a representative demonstration of all the mechanisms available to cities looking to decarbonize their economies. But what this research does do, potentially for the first time, is combine relevant literature on community engagement and energy development with an examination of the specific strategies that cities are using to source renewable electricity on a regional scale. Together, these findings demonstrate the potential opportunity that is being offered by the renewable energy transition to more greatly involve civic actors in the process of energy development, which can, of course, result in the localization of benefits, as well as the potential alleviation of existing social inequalities. Together, these findings demonstrate the potential opportunity offered by large-scale decarbonization efforts to allow for greater civic involvement in the development of energy, which would result in the localization of benefits and the potential alleviation of pre-existing inequalities. Given the recent emergence of regional renewable energy procurement mechanisms, it's not necessarily surprising that civic actors are being a little bit underrepresented. But moving forward, leaders and decision makers pursuing city-level decarbonization through regional collaboration should really look to utilize this opportunity to take stock of pertinent regional development issues, social inequalities, and the social implications of the potential procurement mechanisms they're looking to implement. Further research detailing the comparative local impacts and success of different procurement mechanisms across local cities and social contexts would aid our understanding of the significance of civic engagement in this context. And this is something that is already beginning to be looked into by the Social Energy Lab, where research is being developed to examine how the processes surrounding the development of different forms of citizen or civic involvement in renewable energy procurement can contribute to topics of energy justice as discussed in this presentation. This research is really necessary to begin working towards the establishment of a more just distribution of the impacts of energy, and this research also indicates that the renewable energy transition is an incredible opportunity that we should not let go to waste. Thank you very much. These are just some acknowledgements for my work, and if you're interested in more information, please feel free to reach out to me at my email there, or to check out the lab's website at socialexergy.com. Thank you very much.